At 76, Meryl Streep has finally broken her silence, and what she revealed about Robert Redford is nothing short of jaw-dropping. For decades, the world saw them as two of Hollywood's most respected legends, timeless, polished, untouchable. But behind the curtain of red carpets and Oscar-worthy performances, a very different story was waiting to be told. A story of pain, of survival, of secrets that even Meryl, after working beside him for years, never saw coming. Now, for the first time, she's pulling back the veil on Redford's hidden past, uncovering a series of devastating truths that not only changed how she saw him, but how the world may remember him forever. And once you hear what he lived through, you might never look at him the same again. To the world, Robert Redford has always been the image of calm, measured, refined, and effortlessly elegant. But Meryl Streep says the man we saw on screen was shaped by a past no one could have guessed. Long before the fame, the money, or the movie sets, Redford was just a kid trying to survive in Van Nuys, California. And the way he chose to survive? Running with a street gang. Yes. Hollywood's golden boy once lived on the edge, far from the polish we'd come to associate with him. According to Streep, this wasn't teenage rebellion, it was desperation. Redford's gang thrived on danger. Their loyalty was measured in stunts so extreme they bordered on madness. And one day, Redford was faced with the ultimate test. If he wanted to stay in the group, he had to jump off the roof of a tall building. No camera tricks, no stunt doubles, just gravity and the chance of death. And he jumped. He survived the fall, but the memory left a mark. Meryl admitted she was stunned when she learned the story. How could the same man who radiated such grace once be that reckless? That wild? That desperate to belong? For her, the revelation shattered the illusion of Hollywood perfection. Behind the icon was a boy who once stared death in the face, and leapt anyway. But that wasn't the only time Redford faced loss, and what came next would cut even deeper. Behind Robert Redford's calm smile and golden aura lay a heartbreak so deep he could barely speak of it. In 1959, when Redford was still finding his place in the world, he became a father for the very first time. To outsiders, it should have been the beginning of a beautiful chapter, a young family, a hopeful future, the joy of new life. But fate had other plans. His first child, a baby boy named Scott, lived for only 10 weeks. There were no warning signs, no explanations. One night, the baby simply slipped away. Doctors couldn't find a reason. Decades later, the tragedy would be understood as sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. But at the time, it was just an unanswerable nightmare. For a young man barely starting his adult life, it was a wound too heavy to comprehend. Meryl Streep revealed that Redford rarely spoke about that loss, but it never left him. To the public, he was a picture of poise, unshaken, composed, the eternal gentleman. But privately, he carried that grief like a ghost in his chest. Meryl described it as a silence that followed him everywhere. And within that silence lived guilt, the kind that keeps you awake at night, whispering, "What if I had checked sooner? What if I could have done something?" No one could have answered those questions. But for Robert Redford, they never stopped echoing. Even as his fame rose, even as he became one of the most admired figures in Hollywood, that early tragedy defined him. It taught him that success could never erase sorrow, and that even legends bleed in private. But fate wasn't finished with him yet. Because just 3 years later, Redford would face another terrifying battle, one that nearly took everything. 3 years after losing his first child, Robert Redford once again found himself staring into the face of heartbreak. This time, it was the birth of his second son, James, a moment that should have brought healing, but instead came cloaked in fear. James was born dangerously premature, his tiny body weak, his heartbeat fragile. Doctors delivered the chilling news. His chance of survival was less than 40%. For Redford and his wife Lola, it was like standing on the edge of a cliff for the second time. But this time, they weren't just afraid of losing their baby. Lola's life was also in danger. Complications during labor pushed her to the brink, and Redford was forced to watch helplessly as both his wife and newborn son teetered between life and death. Meryl Streep later said it was this moment that changed something fundamental in Robert. The fearless boy who once jumped off a roof just to prove himself was now a man paralyzed by the thought of losing everything he loved. She described him as haunted but hardened, shaped by the dual agony of watching life almost slip away, twice. But miracles do happen. Against all odds, both James and Lola survived. The trauma, though, left its mark. James would go on to live a full, passionate life, even becoming a filmmaker and activist in his own right. But Redford never forgot how close he came to burying another child, and possibly the love of his life. Meryl believed this brush with death gave Redford something rare, a quiet empathy that seeped into every role he ever played. He didn't act grief, he knew it. He didn't pretend fear. He had lived it. But while his family survived, another part of Robert's life was slowly falling apart. And it happened so quietly, few even noticed, for nearly 3 decades. Robert Redford and Lola Van Wagenen appeared to have what so many in Hollywood never find, a stable, enduring marriage. They survived the unthinkable together, the death of a child, near loss of another, and the pressures of fame that often destroy even the strongest bonds. From the outside, their union looked unshakable. Redford was the dashing star adored worldwide, and Lola was the calm, grounded presence behind him. Together, they raised a family, built a home, and quietly stood the test of time, or so it seemed. But behind closed doors, the story was shifting. There were no screaming headlines, no messy tabloid scandals, just a slow unraveling. Redford, ever private, never revealed what changed. But by the mid-1980s, the cracks began to show. Distance replaced closeness. Silence replaced communication. Eventually, they chose separation, not in chaos, but in quiet understanding. Their divorce was finalized without drama, without bitterness. Still, it stunned the public. Fans had believed their love was different, more real, more enduring. Meryl Streep admitted even she was shocked. She had always seen Robert as a man of unwavering loyalty, someone anchored by commitment. The end of his marriage reminded her, and all of us, that even the strongest hearts can outgrow one another. That love, no matter how deep, can quietly reach its limit. And for Redford, it wasn't failure. It was life. He and Lola had shared unimaginable pain, breathtaking joy, and a lifetime of memories. But some stories don't end with forever. Some end with respect and silence. But how did Meryl Streep come to know Redford's deepest truths? What made their connection so different, so enduring, and so unbreakable? The answer lies not in romance, but in something far more powerful. Their chemistry was undeniable. In Out of Africa, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford delivered one of the most hauntingly beautiful love stories ever captured on film. Audiences around the world were swept away by their connection. So natural, so magnetic, it didn't feel like acting. Every glance, every pause between words felt alive. Viewers were convinced there had to be something real behind those scenes. But the truth? It was never about romance. Meryl and Robert built something deeper, a creative bond founded on trust, respect, and emotional transparency. According to those close to the production, even the director, Sidney Pollack, struggled to articulate what made their connection so electric. He once said their performances felt like chasing lightning, and maybe that's exactly what it was, a rare energy that can't be faked, rehearsed, or replicated. Off-screen, there were no secret affairs, no tabloid whispers. What they shared wasn't built on desire, it was built on soul. Meryl brought fierce precision and emotional fire. Redford brought understated depth and quiet charisma. Instead of competing, they complemented each other perfectly. It wasn't just 2 actors performing, it was 2 souls speaking a language only they understood. They reunited years later in Lions for Lambs, older, wiser, no longer playing lovers, but equals confronting weightier truths. And yet, the connection hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. Their scenes weren't charged with romantic tension, but something more profound. Trust built over decades, a silent rhythm of understanding forged in the fires of storytelling and shared vulnerability. Redford once said of Meryl, "Whatever we had, it wasn't love, but it was just as powerful." And Meryl? She often described Robert as the only man who never had to say anything, and still told me everything. But beneath all that connection, there was still one battle Redford never talked about, one that nearly stole his future before it ever began. Before the fame, before the heartbreak, before the rebellion, Robert Redford faced a terrifying battle that almost ended his story before it ever began. At just 11 years old, while enjoying what should have been a carefree day at the beach, his life suddenly changed. Without warning, his muscles gave out mid-swim. His body, once full of energy and boyish curiosity, became paralyzed. The diagnosis? Polio. It was every parent's nightmare in 1940s America. The disease swept through communities like a ghost, leaving children crippled or worse. For Redford, it meant weeks confined to a bed, isolated, frightened, unsure if he would ever walk, run, or live normally again. The boy who had once thrived on movement and mischief was now locked inside a body that refused to listen. Meryl Streep would later reflect on how that silent suffering molded him. She said, "That illness didn't just try to break his body, it built his soul." Redford never spoke of it publicly in detail, but those who knew him sensed it in everything he did. That quiet intensity, that calm under pressure, that almost sacred stillness. It wasn't for show. It was survival turned to strength. Years later, Redford publicly honored Jonas Salk, the man who developed the polio vaccine, calling him a personal hero. But to Meryl, that moment wasn't just gratitude. It was Robert's private war made visible. A gesture of honor to the scientist who gave him a second chance at life. Polio didn't ruin Robert Redford. It refined him. It gave him a tenderness few leading men possessed. A depth that couldn't be rehearsed. And a reminder that even legends are born from pain, not perfection. But after surviving illness, loss, and heartbreak, Redford still wasn't done dancing with danger. What came next was chaos and consequences. You'd never guess it watching him glide across the screen with quiet authority. But in his younger years, Robert Redford was anything but composed. After surviving polio, and just before his rise to stardom, he unraveled in the most unexpected way. It wasn't tragedy that nearly broke him this time. It was rebellion. Redford earned an art scholarship to the University of Colorado. For most, it was a dream. But instead of diving into textbooks, he dove headfirst into chaos. The lectures bored him. The structure felt like a prison. And the moment he tasted freedom, he took it too far. He drank heavily. He partied recklessly. He turned late nights into blurred memories and harmless pranks into near disasters. On campus, he was known less as a student and more as a wildfire, unpredictable, charismatic, untouchable, until he wasn't. After just 18 months, the university had had enough. Redford was expelled. For most people, it would have been a devastating failure, a permanent stain. But for Redford, it was a turning point. He didn't spiral. He didn't break. He just redirected. Years later, Meryl Streep admitted she was shocked when she learned about his college expulsion. The Robert she had worked with, elegant, thoughtful, grounded, seemed nothing like the young man who once chased danger like it was oxygen. But then she understood. He wasn't meant to follow rules, she said. He was meant to break them, and then build something better. That wild chapter taught him what no classroom ever could. It showed him the edge, and how to walk away from it, but only just. Redford's calm wasn't natural. It was earned. The result of learning, the hard way, that not every fire has to burn everything down. But after all the battles, the grief, the danger, the silence, what was left behind? What kind of legacy does a man like Robert Redford leave behind when the camera stops rolling? By the time Robert Redford became a household name, the world had fallen in love with the mask. The soft-spoken heartthrob, the noble rebel, the untouchable screen legend. But what Meryl Streep uncovered and what she now shares is that behind every role was a man who had truly lived. Redford didn't just play pain. He had buried a child. He didn't just act courage. He had jumped off rooftops and survived a deadly illness. He didn't just pretend to endure heartbreak. He had watched his marriage slowly fade in silence. And he didn't chase fame. He chased meaning, born from loss, guilt, near death, and recovery. Meryl described him as a man sculpted by suffering, not spotlight. His calm wasn't just personality, it was protection. His silence wasn't mystery, it was memory. Every quiet moment he gave on screen came from years of knowing just how loud life's pain could be. Even when Redford was hailed as a Hollywood icon, praised for his activism and artistry, Meryl says he never let it go to his head, because he knew how fragile everything truly was. He had learned it the hard way. Through death, through illness, through almost losing the people he loved most. He didn't become wise. He was wise because he had been broken and chose to rebuild anyway. To Meryl, the world knew Robert Redford as a star, but she knew him as a survivor, not just of the industry, but of life. And that's what made him unforgettable. But even after all that, one question still remained. What kind of legacy does a man like that leave behind when the final curtain falls? When the spotlight fades and the applause stops, what remains isn't the fame, it's the fight. And Robert Redford's legacy isn't just etched in film history, it's written in the scars no one ever saw. He lost a child. He nearly lost another. He watched his wife fade from partner to stranger. He stared death in the face more than once, and lived to tell no one. He didn't speak these wounds into the world, but he carried them. And Meryl Streep, perhaps the only person who ever truly saw him without the Hollywood filter, is the one now revealing the truth. She didn't do it to scandalize. She did it to honor. To remind us that strength is often born in silence, and that legends aren't made on screen. They're forged in the shadows. Redford taught us that vulnerability isn't weakness. That loss doesn't define you, but what you do afterward does. And that sometimes, the calmest souls are the ones who've survived the loudest storms. So now that you know what Robert Redford lived through, the heartbreak, the danger, the pain he never shared, ask yourself, how will you remember him? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the truth deserves to be heard.